Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Bean Studios, live from the center of the universe, Northfield, Vermont. I'm here with a guest today named Joe Gervais. Joe is a candidate for state senate in Bennington County, and yes, he did. He made the 2-hour drive all the way to Northfield just to come talk to us today. So, welcome, Joe. Thank you very much for coming down here.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here. I really appreciate the invitation, Paul.
Absolutely. I was at the veto session on, well, I guess it was 2 days ago, so Monday, and Guy pulled me aside when he was having lunch, and he was sitting with a gentleman I didn't know, and he said, Paul, I want you to interview this guy. He's a legit candidate down in Bennington County. Let's get him on the show. And I said, why not? Absolutely. So here we are. Thank you once again. So
You're welcome.
I'm sure we could talk a lot about your campaign. And we can talk about what you want to try to do as a politician. And I think we definitely should go there. But why don't you just give
let's stop first.
Yeah.
You use that word politician.
And,
you look at my background. I've been a servant to people.
So let's talk about that. Tell the
and
people.
I'm looking at this as another opportunity to serve and to bring back that word that used to be involved, called public service.
Yeah.
Or being a public servant.
Well, so let's talk a little bit about your background then. What have you? So you've been, now you're running for office. This is something you obviously want to do. But where did that come from? What's your story? What have you done? Let's say for the past 15 years, or honestly, your whole life. That's part of the reason why we have people down here is we want to interview them and find out who the heck they are. So
yeah, thanks. I'll go back further. I just had the opportunity a few weeks ago to go to what I call Fort Gordon, what they're now calling Fort Eisenhower.
Okay.
And watch my stepson graduate from his signal officer leadership course.
Wow.
The interesting thing is this is the same course that I went through 39 years earlier. But communications technology might have changed a little bit in the last 4 decades.
Maybe just a little bit.
Yeah. So I spent 10 years serving in the armed forces as an Army reservist and in the National Guard.
Okay.
And that gave me some training on discipline and leadership. I spent about 30 years working in the technology industry, first in information technology, and then I transitioned into product management because I kept finding that the products we were using didn't meet my needs.
Okay. In terms of information technology?
Right. So transitioning from being a customer to being the hub of an interface, gathering customer requirements, and then transferring those requirements to the engineering organization. I understood my constituents and represented those constituents to the organization as we were building products. And I spent 20 years doing that in product management. A lot of time in that. It's cradle to grave product management. So you'd birth the product, and then you'd announce the product. A lot of interaction with media in that, and then work with customers through the entire product life cycle. 2013, 2012, my wife and I had come back to visit family here in Vermont, and I asked her the question, would you ever want to move back here? Because she grew up in Arlington.
Sure.
And her answer was no, never.
Really?
No, never was all of 5 months. And then her mom had a medical emergency.
Okay.
And we were in the best position to move in and take care of her mom. Her mom really wanted to finish her life in her own home.
Yeah.
So with 7 siblings living in the area at the time, we moved back from California to take care of her mom.
Wow. My goodness, that's a big shift from California to here. Well, maybe not so much, I guess. But I can't blame her though for wanting to spend the rest of her days at her home. That's pretty special that you guys were able to make that happen.
Right. Yeah, it was a wonderful 7.5 years doing that. And she had a glorious finish in the midst of the COVID lockdowns with
Oh wow.
Much of her family around her bedside as she passed, and then we had the conversation with the funeral home. Well, you can have a funeral, but it's got to be an outside service, limited to 10 people. There were 13 around her bedside. Who don't we invite?
Yeah.
It's just nuts. But
what year? That was during 2020?
That was 2020, May of 2020.
Okay.
So 2013, we moved back here. I spent the next 2 years commuting back and forth to California and, out to customers.
Commuting back and forth. That's just a funny way to put that.
That was a warm-up because following that, we'd been involved with a missions organization, Wycliffe Associates, and they were going through a transition. They had spent most of the previous 50 years assisting with all the ancillary tasks around Bible translation, helping with fundraising, helping with schools, helping with airfield development,
Sure.
other needs, so that the translators could actually work on translation. The organization was approached by somebody in Nepal, and he said, I've taken your English language learning. Could you transition that to actually teaching us how to do Bible translation?
Sure.
Our language is so small, we'll never get the Bible unless we do it ourselves. Can you teach us?
What do you mean their language is so small? Meaning there's only so many people that use that language, or?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
I'm just curious.
Yeah. And, you look, at the time it was costing $1 to $2 million to do a Bible translation. There are 7,000 languages in the world. That's a huge financial requirement in order to reach every language.
Wow.
And some of these languages were actually dying faster than resources could be made available.
Wow.
So when you can bring it to the local church that doesn't have the barrier of having to learn the language, learn the culture, and they can immediately start translation, you've taken that, $1 million challenge and turned it into something that, for a few $1,000s, you can launch a Bible translation.
Wow.
Similarly to what does it take to podcast today and the equipment there, we give them a tablet with some Bible translation resources, and they've got everything they need, and a $200 tablet.
They just can do it. Yeah,
Right.
It used to cost, I'm sure, like you'd said, millions of dollars to do that. But I bet the simplicity of what we can do now, it's not even close to the amount. Just like verification even of certain words, like to say that that's what that says, right? That's got to be really hard,
Right.
without technology.
Right. And, the prior methodology, you'd use an outside consultant. That outside consultant wouldn't necessarily know the language, so then you'd take the translation, back translate it back into a language the consultant needs, check it. Okay, where'd the error come in the translation or in the back translation? So I did that for about 5 years, and commuting to California got replaced with commuting to the South Pacific, where sometimes it'd be 40 hours of travel to get on location.
Wow.
And God provides everything we need.
Yeah, He does.
Never had jet lag. Just incredible endurance in that situation. My wife was taking care of her mom, and, I'd be gone 50, 80% of the time. And, in that, He drew us closer as a couple, while we each, had our respective ministries, her taking care of her mom and myself, equipping saints around the world to bring Bibles to their local languages.
When you say respective ministries, can you add a little bit more context to that? Because I've never really heard it quite described that way, especially when you're talking about taking care of somebody. I'm just curious. That's all.
Sure. With elder care, is it a task, is it a job, or is it a calling? With my wife, it was clearly a calling. She had brothers and sisters in town. She said, this is what we need to support us as we're doing this, so that we can have our respite, so we can make it to church every week, those types of things. But, it's a higher calling, and with it as a higher calling, there's low times in that work.
Absolutely.
I don't know how many times we were up and down the roller coaster as her mom, had falls and further back injuries, or she broke her shoulder.
Oh, wow.
There was another point she had a stroke, but, Susan just had this incredible patience with her mom, incredible love for her mom through that. And in the end, it was an absolute blessing to her to be able to serve her mom in that way for that period.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's why I kind of asked, because I've seen this, not in my own life necessarily where I've had to do stuff like this, but some very close family members of mine. And to think in this world, a lot of people just put their family members into nursing homes or hospice care or whatever people have to do. I'm not here to judge because everybody's got to do what they got to do. But if you're lucky enough to be in a situation, especially if you're the old one, the one who's on their way out, to be surrounded by family and to be taken care of by family, I don't think that there's any other wealth in this world that matters more than that. When you're laying on your deathbed, who are you around? And I think that's really beautiful. That's why I asked to expand on that. So, but you have spent time in the South Pacific, your ministry. So, talk a little bit about that as a missionary, or
Yeah. I was a missionary with Wycliffe Associates. My final role was the regional director for the Pacific. So I was responsible for all the activities across the South Pacific.
Okay.
So Australia, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, all the other Melanesian nations down there. And, there's a joke. What do you call somebody that speaks many languages?
Bilingual?
Multilingual.
Multilingual, yeah.
2 languages.
Yeah.
Bilingual.
Yeah.
1 language. American.
Yeah.
And,
that makes sense, yeah.
I was that American that I struggled with language. And what it meant was I had to quickly develop staff in the countries. I remember I was in Vanuatu one time, and I'd brought some of my brothers from Papua New Guinea with me. Now, the 2 countries are Melanesian countries. It's very similar culture, but they had different pidgin languages that they used. I had given a talk in the morning, and in the afternoon there was a Q&A session, and people were asking questions on information I had covered. And it's like, okay, what's going on here? And it turns out I was using American English, and they were used to Australian English. And there was enough difference that they weren't catching enough. And even though the 2 pidgin languages were different, they were easy to communicate between those 2 pidgin languages. So it's like, okay, I stand back, you guys take over. We're going to be all good here.
Just as a note, I for maybe people that don't know, they're watching Enemy. What's a pidgin language?
It's a trade language that was developed, as people came in and did trade in these various languages to talk to the natives.
Okay.
Generally limited vocabulary, like in the Solomon Islands, there's maybe 800 words in this language, but covered the basics of communication.
The important stuff.
Right.
Okay.
Papua New Guinea, it's known as talk pidgin.
Okay, so talk to me a little bit about your experiences going out into these places, and what exactly were you doing? If you're a missionary, I have an idea of what a missionary is, but what was the work that you were doing? Bible translation, we've talked a little bit about, but can you talk a little more about that?
Yeah, basically building teams that could then do the training that was necessary to equip churches to do their own Bible translation. So getting the teams the resources they needed, computers, other things, the financial resources, and then having a team of trainers that could then go out into the various villages and do the training so local churches could do their translation work.
Okay. That's pretty incredible. So you had to really build teams of people that were not really used to working with each other and going into places that they've never been and that kind of work.
Right. And, some of these places were challenging. One of the languages that my team worked with, I didn't get to work with. This was the Sawi people in what used to be Irian Jaya, which is now Papua, Indonesia. A Canadian named Don Richardson had gone in there in the 60s, and at the time, those people were still cannibals.
Okay.
And, he did the translation of their New Testament. He trained them in Christianity. And then after, a number of years, he went back to the U.S. And this people, they were waiting for a Westerner to come in for 50 years to finish the work that Don had started because they didn't have a complete Bible.
Wow.
And
translated.
Right.
Wow. That's incredible. So there must have been some people that were like true believers but didn't have all the pieces.
Right.
That's crazy.
So, we were able to get a team in there in 2018, and in about 3 years, they were able to finish that effort that had been started back in the 60s.
So, can you talk to me a little bit about that? I'm very curious to know about what it's like for people of those native countries who maybe they've never heard about Jesus before, to then hear about Jesus, start to learn about it, and the conversion that they go through. Because I think the reason I ask is because I think there's this conversation, especially in the United States right now, where it's like a lot of people talk about Jesus as if, oh, he's just a spiritual teacher that existed at this certain time, and then in Eastern countries and places like Asia and China, and there's all these different spiritual masters, right? And they say, well, why is Jesus more valid than those guys? And that is what the Christian belief is, and I share that belief. But I just think it's so interesting that people like in China, for example, are being converted to Christianity, and I just think that there's something really powerful about that. So maybe would you talk a little bit about what that's like and what you've seen on your own, if anything, I don't know.
Well, we didn't want to see it. We had 2 requirements for the teams that were doing Bible translation.
Okay.
They had to be bilingual.
Okay.
So know a trade language, like in Indonesia, they'd have to know Indonesian and then know their mother tongue.
Okay.
Their tribal language. The second requirement is they had to be Christians.
Okay.
Those seem like very basic requirements.
I would say so.
Simple as you can get.
Yeah.
What we found time and again, and I first ran into this in Africa in 2015, is there'd be Muslims in the workshop.
Okay.
I was in Burkina Faso in West Africa, and it's like, why are you here?
Yeah.
There is nothing written in our language. We recognize Jesus as a prophet. We recognize the Bible for what it is. We want to see, our language preserved through having the Bible in our language.
Okay.
But what we would find is these were 2-week workshops, and they'd be spending the equivalent amount of time in that 2 weeks that a Christian that reads the Bible every day and reads the Bible in a year spends over an entire year.
I see. Okay, so they would be spending a lot of time with it.
And the other thing is you've got the work of the Holy Spirit there. I had a young lady in Papua New Guinea. She was a 6th grade dropout, not very confident,
Okay.
hadn't worked with computers, and she was just real nervous in the beginning of the workshop. One of the national leaders prayed for her that first day. And the next day we're giving out assignments. And we find out a couple of days later that between that prayer and handing assignments the next day, she had had a dream where God walked her through all of Genesis chapter 12.
Wow.
And we randomly assign assignments, and that random assignment to Lena was Genesis chapter 12. So she gets that, and she sees that that's exactly what she dreamed the night before. It's the living word of God.
Yeah.
And God is still working through that. In the case of non-believers, what we'd find is they'd be assigned a chapter on Jesus' love, like out of the book of John or something.
Sure.
And it would be exactly what they need to meet them where they're at.
Yeah.
And then you'd see in these workshops 8, 10, 12 Muslims at the end of the workshop going, I want to be baptized.
Wow.
And then you'd start seeing these baptisms. And, it was non-believers coming in, it was Muslims coming in, Hindus coming in, people of other faith coming in. And just through that time in God's Word, they saw God's love for them, and they accepted that love.
What do you think it is about? And I know this is totally straying from the reason why you're here to talk today, but I think this is great. I think that our viewers especially enjoy this too. But what do you think it is about the teaching of Jesus Christ that was so attractive to them? Because they have all their beliefs and their God, right? Well, what is it different about his that gets to them? And you say the Holy Spirit, and I can understand that, but what do you think it is? I mean, where do you, it just meets them where they're at? I think that's a really interesting point. But
the other thing is just God is love.
Yeah.
And, you go through the Bible and it's just love, love, love. I had a very difficult experience in 2021. I had a brother-in-law that came down with COVID, and they brought him into the hospital. I had known about alternative treatment at the time. I had suggested to him that he get certain drugs that were being censored at the time.
For example?
Ivermectin.
Ivermectin. Yeah, that's what I figured. Yeah. Yeah.
So they bring him in the hospital. They put him on remdesivir. They follow the hospital protocol. Yeah. He's partway into that battle, and then I get a call that my parents had both been vaccinated,
yep.
and my parents are both in the hospital.
Yep.
So I have to leave my wife here with her brother and his kids and head to California and help my parents. My dad was getting better, and I believe part of that was because he's had issues with asthma, and there were certain steroids that he was on that counteract what was going on.
Okay.
My mother was on the same hospital protocol as my brother-in-law. And the morning of March 29th of 2021, my wife calls me and says, Mike's not going to make it. We're getting ready to go into the hospital. Go to the hospital. And this is, midnight my time, 3 a.m. back here in Vermont. And he was in Albany Med at the time. I hang up the phone, and not 5 minutes later, a friend from Fiji's like, Pastor Joe, we're getting ready for our prayer meeting. Fiji's 15 hours ahead of Vermont, 12 hours ahead of California. We're getting ready for our prayer meeting. What do you need prayer for? And, that was just what we needed at that time.
Yeah.
Later in the day, my siblings and my dad and I met with the doctors, and the doctors were like, there's nothing more we can do for your mom. And we made the decision to remove life support. The hospital at that time had a no visitation. They wouldn't allow visitors at the time, so the best we could do was, she was on the first floor, we could go to the outside of her window and see her through the window. And if we were lucky, a nurse would open the window and might be able to talk to her. But, she was sedated because of the ventilator. The day she passed, we were able to make visits in. And I got talking with one of the nurses. The nurse made a comment about the book I was carrying, which was my Bible. The nurse was a Christian as well. And we got talking, and lunchtime I went back to the house, and I got a copy of Pacific Saints, a book I had written about the work I had done in the Pacific. And, it was just developing this relationship with the nurse. Later in the afternoon, my dad's priest came in to give last rites, and single visitor hospital requirement. The nurse is handing all three of us gowns to gown up. And it's like, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
My mom passed in the afternoon, so we had my brother-in-law's death in the morning, my mom in the afternoon. And as we know now, that hospital protocol wasn't designed to help people recover. I get back to my dad's that afternoon, and one of the pastors from Papua New Guinea reaches out to me and said, Joe, Holy Spirit said to pray for you. What's going on? So I just have God bookending this incredible, difficult day with his love for me.
Yeah.
Having people halfway around the world just lift me up in prayer, to have God tell me through them, I got you. Everything's going to be okay. And that's the God I serve. That's the God that loves this world and everyone in it. And, that's one of the most exciting things about campaigning is...
Yeah, I was going to say this is a perfect segue. I knew where this was going, yeah.
I get 5,000 doors to go knock on, and there's going to be people that say, you're crazy. Why would you want to do this? And it's like, I'm called to this.
Yes.
And I get to talk a little bit about Jesus to them.
Sure.
And share that love. And
yeah. Let's see where
that's
it
just
goes.
a blessing.
Yes, it is. It is. I think that's a perfect segue to kind of where I think the conversation definitely needs to go, because we need to talk about your campaign. But you know, there's so much darkness too in this world, right? We talk about the world and how God loves us and the world, for that matter. But right now we're dealing with, especially here in Vermont, just like this crazy, seemingly physical battle, right? To a lot of us, it seems like what we're fighting a lot over is, you know, finances in the state, or we're fighting about just different, well, you know, like the safe injection sites. I guess my point is we talk about this a lot in terms of the physical reality, but I get a sense, and I know that you do too, that there's something beyond what we can see going on. And I see this in the state house, even physically. Sometimes I see things that, without the perspective that I have until recently, I never would have noticed. But I'm just picking up on things where I'm saying, "Gee, that's strange." You know, like what's actually going on here? So maybe you could talk a little bit about that from your perspective, and maybe what do you see? Because I know we were talking about before we came in here, uh, really the spiritual warfare that's going on ultimately, because that is what it is. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that's what we're dealing with.
Yeah, and you know, you asked about my history as we
Yeah.
opened this show, and you know, God's prepared me for such a time as this. You know, and you know, I look at my military experience, and at the time, I wasn't a fighter. I was in the military. I was a leader, but it was Signal Corps. It was a support role. More than frontline infantry or something
Sure.
like that. But that was seeds being planted. The years involved in overseas ministry through missions organizations. We were in places where cannibalism had happened within the past generation, and there were no men between 30 and 40 years old because of that.
Wow.
Um,
That's incredible.
That's darkness.
Yes, that is
and,
darkness.
To be able to bring the light in and the love of Jesus, it's a real blessing. But you learn how to recognize when you're dealing with things that aren't of flesh and blood, that are of a different realm, and how to respond appropriately. We've got a large divide between the progressive supermajority and the conservative base up in Montpelier. And, that goes back to what's the foundation of their worldview. And, recognizing that their worldview is different, and what's feeding their worldview, whether it's recognized or not, is darkness. You respond differently because it's not the individual that's necessarily attacking you. It's the spiritual warfare that's behind that.
Yes.
Love the person, not the sin.
Yeah.
So, though there's difficulty in that because of our human nature, having that perspective, I think, gives me a leg up, when I'm elected to, be able to serve more effectively because I can see what battles I'm fighting, and these aren't personal attacks, these are attacks from the enemy.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think about this all the time. What is their worldview? What is it based in? Because I know what ours is based in and what the founding of this country ultimately is based in, at least to some degree, which is a Christian morality. But and I think that's always what makes me laugh is people will tell me, oh, I'm an atheist, or oh, I don't believe in God, or not Jesus. No, like, I don't believe in that. But their whole morality and the way that their country is structured is entirely based in Christianity. So whether you like it or not, in some way or another, you have a connection to Christianity. And I guess what's their worldview now? Where are they? Where is this coming from? Like, what are they doing?
I recently had the opportunity to do a worldview assessment through Nehemiah Institute, and that was interesting because it, showed me where I was solidly grounded in the Bible and areas where, I'd better go back and brush up a little bit.
Sure.
But part of it, at the end is it shows you where is your worldview. Is it fully grounded in the Bible? Are you a moderate Christian? Is humanism driving things? And we look today with some of the genetic engineering thing, that humanism is becoming a religion.
I know where you're going with this. I know where their worldview is based.
Yeah.
Yeah, they believe that we are the solution to all the problems, like the individual even.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And climate has become a religion.
Oh yes, it has.
Yeah.
A dystopian, apocalyptic religion, like doomsday.
Right.
Like we talk about the revelation, and they're talking about the climate killing us all, and the planet being so hot.
Right, right. And they miss the science that, when it's warmer, the ocean emits carbon dioxide, and that's why carbon goes up. It's a result of and not a cause of.
Well, we definitely could talk a lot about the climate thing,
Right.
because it's like that's a whole conversation within itself, the science and everything. I don't know if you're familiar with geoengineering at all. Yeah, that's something I'm very big on, as not big on as an advocate for, but rather resisting the geoengineering that's existing currently, and what I believe is causing a lot of the climate problems as it is right now. But that goes into what we're kind of talking about, and that's what I don't seem to understand. Right? They believe in their worldview that they are the solution. Technology is the solution. Human creation is the solution. It's also a root of the problem, by the way. So supposedly, so whether we're talking about climate change, whether we're talking about a lot of our economic issues, they believe that they are the solution and that they have the ability to solve the problem. And I guess where I'm going with this is why do we? I find it to be so frustrating that guys like you and me, or there's some other folks who I know who are very grounded in their religious views, and I find it to be frustrating at times that we don't seem to get the same spotlight and ability to get elected, to be quite honest, in this state specifically, and I don't really understand why, and I think maybe you can speak a little bit to that, but it's frustrating to me because it seems like what we're talking about right now, it's not popular, and I don't think that it's ever really been popular, so to say. But why is it like this now, as opposed to, say, when our country was founded, or even 100 years ago?
I think one of the situations we're in right now is, until recently, information has been controlled.
Yeah.
We had Operation Mockingbird back in the 70s.
Yeah.
It never stopped.
No.
So, you don't have news being reported on television. You have one side of information being reported. And that's, repeated often enough, people believe it's true.
That's right.
Now, there's a whole another universe of alternate media that can fill in the rest of the story. But how many people are using these alternate media are the question. You look at, I believe, it's important to steward our environment. I think there's a lot of information being hidden about these green energy
Of course.
alternatives. You take solar, it operates at 20% efficiency. That means when you need another gigawatt of electricity, instead of putting in a gigawatt plant, you got to put in a 5 gigawatt solar plant. That costs money.
Yeah.
Somebody is being enriched through that.
Absolutely.
And somebody else is being taxed for that.
Yep.
And, what's not being recognized is these efforts are taxing the poor and the middle class.
Yeah. The most. And they're the ones who can't afford it the most. They're the ones who take the biggest hit on it.
Right. So, you're putting in place regressive tax systems for something that ultimately, doesn't have the efficiency that's required. So, there's a lot of work in educating people in, what's really going on and, what their choice is. You and I talked Monday a little bit about Get Real. Get Real is a statewide campaign that Bill Huff and others have been working on to have all of us messaging with a common set of messages. And, the economy right now, is a key concern. Right before the election, taxpayers are going to see, property tax increases of 13.8% for education on average. And, as I talk to people, a lot of them, it's a stretch. They're already making choices of food versus heating oil, and it's just getting worse.
Yes, it is getting much worse. I do want to say, I do have some comments from people, and we always like to read the comments on the show. I hope that's all right real quick. Let's see. Barbara Gale Donis writes, "You are a blessing!" Exclamation point. Autumn Gifford writes, "Joe, you are in my prayers for the ministry to succeed. I'll be voting for you this November." And Jerry Zeller writes, "It's free money that is destroying this country. The number of tax-exempt industries, working men or women, can barely afford themselves these days. Now you want them to pay for the way of homeless and the immigrants, etc., prisoners, etc. The non-productive individuals outnumber the productive by 4 to 1. Fix that, or better yet, end the free world ideas and get back to you earn it, you deserve to get it." Okay. Jerry also writes, "Stop the thought that just because you want to save everyone, stop trying to tell me that I should be able to give all mine to someone else. Have the problem, no accountability, then add the courts giving people giving people a mulligan 1,500 times. At some point, everyone needs to be held accountable, and then and only then will the scales be balanced." We always appreciate people writing in. Those are good comments, and I agree with the points that you're making there. So, and not to interrupt where we were, but I think this kind of plays into what we're talking about. We see a lot of the way that the world is structured, right? And I think that this is what I always find so interesting. What he's talking about is like, help the homeless, help the immigrants, help the prisoners. Isn't that all those things that Jesus would say you should be doing, right? But are we helping them or are we enabling them?
Right.
And how are we enabling them? In which way are we paying for it when it's really not helping anybody? It's just kind of throwing money at a problem and then hoping things get better.
Right. And, we've had growth in our homeless population here as we've increased our benefits to the homeless population.
Of course.
And it's like, well, gee, I can become a resident of Vermont after 24 hours.
Yeah.
I'll move from Florida to Vermont to be homeless there because the benefits are better.
That's one of the funniest things, too, is like I've heard, I think maybe it was Sarah George, and I'm not exact on this, but somebody made the argument, oh, well, this doesn't go against the Constitution. We're allowed to give people residency as soon as, we're allowed to do that. It's funny to me how they'll argue that the U.S. Constitution, they'll argue its validity when it's something for them, but then when it's something against them, then the Constitution doesn't matter anymore. But that's just a separate point. Sorry.
Right.
It's like the justification. It's just like...
2 years ago when I was campaigning for the State House, I wrote an article about the fallacy of the housing first homeless policy. You're just enabling at that point. You're not getting to the root issue of why are they homeless? Is it an addiction that's got them in a homeless situation? Is it mental illness? What's the real root of the homelessness? That's what's got to be addressed rather than, oh, they'll be all better once they've got a roof over their head.
Yeah.
And we seem to be focused first on getting them out of the cold rather than the fundamental issue that's caused the homelessness in the first place. I want to circle back to education and, Jerry's comments on accountability there. Arlington, we had our town meeting back in March, and there was a question raised of just what's the performance of the students?
Sure.
And it was like 40 or 50% of the students are on grade level for reading and a similar number for math. That's failing.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
So, per capita student spending, we're certainly in the top 5 in the nation, but our performance is well below the bottom half. We're deep into the bottom half. And that's not what's being discussed with, the education funding. It's just education is important. We must fund it, period.
Which isn't wrong as a statement.
But
yeah.
I've run businesses over, decades. If the business isn't performing, you have to restructure it so it can perform.
Exactly.
And that's the same thing with education. couple of years ago, I was getting an ice cream at, the local dairy farm, and an 8th grader was running the counter that day, one of the grandchildren of the farm. And, he apologized to me. He says, I really struggle with counting change out. They're not teaching me math, and what they're teaching me in school for math isn't math. And my dad's had to tutor me.
How could that even be?
Yeah.
Where was that?
That was in Arlington.
Arlington, okay. And what school did those kids go to? Just curious.
He probably went to Fisher Elementary
Okay.
and then, Arlington High.
Well, I always have to be careful with this subject because my mother is a first grade teacher. I always argue, she is the best, in my opinion. And from what I know, she's teaching those kids the stuff that matters. But I know for a fact elsewhere in this state, they are not only not teaching kids the things that matter, they're filling them up with stuff that is completely irrelevant to their success beyond school.
Right, and that's part of our Get Real campaign,
right.
is remove the propaganda from the classroom.
Yeah.
Get back to the basics of reading, writing, arithmetic. And as I've canvassed folks in the past, I've run across a number of school teachers, and a lot of them are talking about they're given curriculums that they must use, and the curriculums just don't work for their student base.
No.
And they have no flexibility. They have to use that curriculum. So they want to do better. It's not the teachers, but they're being forced by administration to use certain tools that just aren't effective.
Sure. So I want to go back to that question. I was kind of asking the question, why is it that what guys like you and I and the views that we have and the beliefs that we hold dear to us, why does it seem like we are so unsuccessful in the political world? And I'm not saying that either of us are unsuccessful in the political world, but either of us have been elected. And I've run once, and I'll probably run again someday. But my question is still important, because what is it about Vermont? What is it about the world? Like, why is it so hard for people to, like for example, believers of Jesus Christ? Why is it not popular, I guess, in the political world? What about it?
I think one of the questions is, have the political parties' platforms evolved over the years to the point where there's a number of people in the electorate that identify with a certain party, but the values that they identify with have shifted to the other party?
Yeah, that's true.
And, I've had a number of doors closed on me when they ask, are you a Republican? Yes. I'm a Democrat. Thank you. Goodbye.
Yeah, I've had that too.
I actually had one guy last campaign invited me into his house so that he could kick me out.
Really?
And
what a jerk.
I just said thank you and have a good day.
That's all you can do.
But, with Get Real, we want to talk about the issues.
Yeah.
And are these issues important to you?
Yeah.
And build that common ground independent of the party.
Yeah.
I saw Phil Scott yesterday asking for, moderates to run for office.
Across the board.
Across the board.
Yeah.
And, all of the issues that we're addressing with Get Real, whether it's climate, whether it's education, whether it's affordability, housing, these are issues that affect the entire political spectrum. They're not far-right conservative issues only. They're not far-left issues. They're issues that affect everybody. And, we're working to get the conversation on the issues out front, and then later on we can have the conversation about party. But
sure,
it's an issue.
Okay, so Jerry also writes, you're exactly right about the schools. Our parents let the schools teach their children. Today the schools teach the children due to lack of parent involvement. There are great teachers out there. Unfortunately, it's like police department. Keep quiet. Only recently that is changing. It's all about accountability and whose fault it is. Common sense is gone. Let's see. Alan Sexton writes, do you have a strategy to address the inevitable attacks from opponents due to your Christian faith? I think that's a really good question, because people are going to say, they are going to come. I agree with that. That's part of the reason why I've been asking the question, because from what I know, it's just not politically, people aren't excited about that, unfortunately. But do you have a strategy to address that?
My track record. What do I do?
Yeah.
I've got decades of experience listening to people and then advocating for people, serving people.
Yeah.
What do people want in Montpelier? They want somebody that's going to listen to them and serve them. Obviously you've got to take the needs of all of the constituents, but I'm driven by the voters and not the special interests. And I think we look at some of the incumbents right now, and it's much more the special interests that have been driving what they're doing than the voters.
Absolutely. So who is the incumbent right now in Bennington County?
Bennington, for the Senate, we're actually in a very unique situation. Brian Campion announced earlier this spring that he was not running for re-election.
That's right.
So that opened that seat. Dick Sears announced he was running for re-election. Dick had been serving for 32 years. And then, unfortunately, he succumbed to an illness that he had been fighting for some time.
That's right.
So this is the first time in 32 years that Dick's seat's been vacant. First time in a long time that both seats are available. On the Democratic side, there's a representative from the House that's running. But it's a jump ball. There's no incumbents in there.
Wow. So so you're in a primary though, right?
I am on the primary ticket, but I'm the sole Republican running for 2 seats.
Okay. So then
So
you've won. Congratulations. Okay, cool. I just wanted to get that info out there for people so that they know.
yeah, and I've got a small business in Arlington. I saw lumber and sell to customers. So, you build a reputation of, serving people, treating people in a certain way. I was at the farmer's market Friday night, and a cannabis farmer, I was having a conversation with him, and he's like, "You're a normal person. You get what we're doing as farmers."
Yeah.
And, I think that's an important thing that, I need people to see that, yeah, Joe's got an MBA and spent 30 years in tech, but he knows how to work hard. Doug Bergman, governor of North Dakota, gave a talk at our Vermont GOP presidential convention. And he said, there's those that take a shower before work, and there's those that take a shower after work. And, all day on the sawmill, especially in a day like yesterday, it's not the shower before work. You've worked and you need that shower after work.
Yes.
And there's a whole class of people that want somebody that knows what work is like and knows how hard people are having to work today. Jerry came back to us and said, well, parents are just giving the schools the job of educating their kids, and they're not taking that responsibility. I think the question is why? 1972, we came off the gold standard. What has happened to the value of the dollar then? I was a child in 1972. My mom, while we were growing up, didn't work outside the home, and Dad only had one job. You look at the situation today, and many young families, pretty much across the board, 2 people are working, and there may be side jobs in there too.
Yeah.
So the time that our families had when I was growing up just aren't available to families anymore because of the inflation over the last 50, 60 years.
Yeah, it's absolutely frustrating. I mean, I think that's one of the most detrimental things to the American people that's ever happened is removing the gold standard, the complete debasing truly of the dollar as a whole. I mean, we've really gotten away from the value that it used to hold, and what that people don't even know what that means anymore. Like, what would that even mean for the dollar to be based on the gold standard, right? And yeah. I think that's a really interesting point, because there is if you can get mothers out of the homes and into the workplace, kids out of the homes into the schools, then you can program the next generation to be basically whatever the state wants. And if the state's mandating curriculum, then you can control the way these kids think and turn them into another brick in the wall, so to say, right? And I think it's a very big concern. That's why the school budget issue has been such a big deal this year. It took me so long to understand why the school budgets was such a big deal, and why the the education finance system in Vermont was such a big deal. And it's ultimately because this is how, in my opinion, the Democrats control the voting base too, because you have so many people in Vermont that are dependent upon the school system because both parents are working.
Right.
They have multiple kids in school. They might even work at the school. Some of these people depend upon it for health care. Then some of the kids are dependent on the free meals, whatever it is. The whole system itself makes everybody more dependent, right? It's a giant social program. And I'm not even necessarily opposed to something like that if it was getting the results that we needed and it wasn't costing what it's costing. And I think that's something every single legislator that wants to be elected this year, every single candidate as they go in, needs to be thinking about this and actually understanding it. And I'm not saying that you don't at all. I'm just throwing that out there. We have one question, and it's about a little bit before 11, so we're probably getting close to wrapping this up. So anyone out there who has any questions for Joe and wants to write in, please do. Jerry writes again, how do you plan on getting the idea out of people's heads that I don't register or vote because my vote doesn't count? I have tried to tell people that it will count if you cast one, otherwise they are right, it doesn't count. Got some answers or possibly ways to convince them? I also see this as a massive problem. I don't know. I had multiple people who are freaking friends of mine who told me, oh, I didn't even vote for you in 22, and I about lost my mind. But anyway, what do you make of that?
It's a real issue, and it's just like running for office. If you don't run, you're not going to win.
That's right.
And if you don't vote, your vote's not going to matter.
Yeah.
We need to take real focus this time on voter registration and get out the vote. I've been involved with Cause of America, which is an organization nationwide that's been looking into voter integrity and working on voter integrity. And a couple of weeks ago, Christina Bobb was on the Monday night call. She's the attorney working for the Republican National Committee on election integrity specifically. And, she was talking about the Trump Force 47 campaign, which is get 100,000 plus volunteers out on the streets, registering the unregistered, and working to get people to vote, whether they vote by absentee, vote early, or show up on November 5th, but get such a turnout that it's too big to cheat.
Yeah.
There was some heated discussion because we've seen, looking at past elections, that early voting becomes information that feeds into, okay, how am I doing? How many more ballots do I need to win the election? Is this something that you want to feed the competition, if you will?
Sure.
Even state of Vermont, as town clerks receive ballots, they report daily who did they receive the ballot from. So as a candidate, I know, so many Democrat-leaning voters have already voted, and so many Republican-leaning voters have voted. It's a real question. But, there's work going on in Congress right now, legislation that Mike Johnson is driving to require voter ID. It's critically important.
Yeah,
we need to know who's voting. And,
This isn't racist, everybody.
Right. And, I'd like to see a system where we vote on paper in person on one day with voter ID.
Yeah.
In the meantime, we need to make sure everybody gets out and votes. And, through that, we'll win these elections.
Well, I agree. We have a comment from Alan Sexton, who writes, I'm anxious to see the reaction of Vermonters that voted for leftists in the current legislature when they received their new property tax bill. Will this be enough to convert even left-leaning taxpayers? I was having this conversation with somebody yesterday, I can't help but to think that at least some Vermonters are going to say to themselves, man, like maybe conservatives like aren't wrong about everything. Like just because they're conservative doesn't mean that they're a Trump supporter too. So maybe there's more to the whole, I don't know, grouping than meets the eye. Maybe they're right about something. You know, I think that people are going to, because who can afford this? Who can afford this unless you have a ton of money?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges is the legislature is really good at kicking the can down the road. And, right now we've got the clean heat standard, which doesn't go in effect until after the election. We have the new clean energy standard.
Yeah.
And, when I was living in California, I remember electricity at 9 cents a kilowatt hour. I still have family members out there. Peak right now, it's 54 cents a kilowatt hour. And they've been leading in moving to renewable energy.
Yeah.
Big pushes for solar, big wind farms. And as I spoke earlier, you need so much more of these renewable sources and battery backup to have an effective grid.
Right.
I was just seeing yesterday, Texas is incentivizing natural gas electric generators to build new plants. And, they had like 5 times the response for what they were looking for. And the reason they have to put these in is because you have wind droughts where you may be 2 or 3 weeks where the turbines aren't turning and generating electricity. Solar, at best, you're only generating 12 hours a day.
In Vermont. Yeah.
Yeah.
For that matter.
Yeah.
If that, at best, you say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then you get cloudy days and other days that just, how much electricity are we generating when there's 2 inches of snow on the panel?
0. Yeah.
So you need an alternative, and you look at these battery systems, and they're putting in battery systems that give you 4 hours of backup. How far does that go?
It's not very far.
Last year there was, a 48-hour period where I had 24 hours of no electricity.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're talking about 4 hours potentially to keep your freezer going, which is just not enough.
Or keep your heater going.
Well, more importantly, and that's what's so scary about it. It's like they're pushing us this direction, and we're completely at the mercy of the weather, which is apparently volatile, which it is, right? And I mean, I make the geoengineering point all the time. I hate to bring it back to that point, but let's say there's people out there that are manipulating the weather, and everyone's dependent upon the grid for eating, for cooking, for their freezer, for their heat, for their everything. And it's the middle of winter, and somebody decides, you know what? Why don't we just sprinkle a little something in to take out the grid there in Vermont? Then everybody's at the mercy of it. They can't leave. Their cars are running on. It's just terrifying. It's like. It's a form of warfare, by the way, as far as I'm concerned. But anyhow, I'll stop that point.
And, we look at the energy transition. We're trying to do this energy transition to clean energy. We're still working on the last energy transition from biomass to oil and gas. How many Vermonters still heat with wood stoves?
Oh, so many.
I still know a few that cook on their wood stoves.
Yeah. A lot of them that use the gas-powered stoves still. I mean, that's still very popular in Vermont. I have a comment here from Alan Sexton, too, who writes, I was in New Hampshire yesterday, and what an enviable difference in expenses. $2.13 for a gallon of gas. A dinner we couldn't have to ransom our children to pay for. We didn't have to ransom our children to pay for. That's beautiful. Yeah, well, I mean, look, man, I absolutely love this state. You see the flag behind me, the Green Mountain Boys. I take a lot of pride in it. Family's been here for 7 generations, right? But day in and day out, I'm wondering, man, I wonder what it's like over there on the other side of the Connecticut River. And I don't really, I'm not going anywhere, just to be very clear. But
yeah, and
there's a lot of people out there that are much worse situations than I am, and they're saying, why am I here again? What am I doing? Like, why do I have to do this? I don't.
Yeah, and Rob Roper wrote a really fascinating article on that just a week or so ago.
Yeah.
Looking at, how do they have a state budget that's half of our budget, with twice the people, and yet in many categories have much better performance out of the government than we do.
I'm always saying this, and I don't know if there's any like I don't know if there's any accountability for this, but like if you're the federal government and like what you just said, right? We're in a state that's half the size, probably even a little bit less than half the size of New Hampshire, and we cost double what they cost. If you're the federal government, the guys printing the money and the people allocating the money from the federal, are you saying like, you know, that state's like they're too irresponsible. We need to do something about that place. Is there any punishment for that? I mean, it's like no, there's not. So every state could do this if they wanted to. It's just, I don't know, it just blows my mind. Like there's no consequence for just completely reckless behavior and screwing over your people. I mean, it seems like there should be.
Like we said a couple of minutes ago, I think the consequence is going to come on November 5th.
Yeah. I think you're right. I hope you're right. I think that a lot of people do too. Alan Sexton writes, "My wife won't let me move. Ha 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 ha." Poor you. I hear you, man. It's hard to leave a place that you define as home. And I've had that conversation with multiple people, including Paul Dame, for example. His family's been in Vermont for a while too, and it's really hard to just give up on home. And I don't want to leave. I love it here, but there are days where it's like, what's going on? And I think that's exactly what they want, though. They want people like myself and you, Alan, to be questioning whether or not you should be here.
And, we'll go back to the question at the beginning of the podcast, which is, why are you running, Joe?
Yeah.
And it's like, I can run in one of two ways. I can leave.
Yeah.
Or I can run for office.
Yeah.
What am I better equipped to do? It's a challenge to run, but
yes, it is.
It's the right thing to do.
Yes, and I want to throw this out there for anyone out there listening who is wondering, is it too late? Can I run? Am I able to run? You are still able to run for office. If you're somebody who lives in a place, a House district or a Senate district where the Republican Party maybe hasn't filled the potential nominations, you can still jump in a write-in campaign to get your name on the ballot for November 5th. So if you want to try to get on the ballot as a Republican, you still can. If you want to get...
It's very easy. I did that 2 years ago.
It's very easy, yeah.
As a House candidate, you need 25 people to vote for you.
Yeah, and then you're on the ballot.
Can you find 25 friends, neighbors, county Republicans to get the word out on your name and get that written in? It's very, very easy. As a senator, it's 50 write-in votes.
No, it's absolutely worth it. And if this is something you're interested in, there's a lot of resources. You can reach out even to me on all of my social media. I can help you get connected with people that you need to get connected with. It's not too late. You can still run as independent too. If you're even interested in trying to face up against the Democrats, I'm not sure if that's something you can still do. If you're a moderate Democrat, somebody who, maybe wants to try to oppose them, it's out there. But I think for today's show, we're at a good stopping point. I have a couple of comments I just want to read real quick. Big Siege writes, "Is there AC in the Creemee studio?" Ha ha. No, but actually it's kind of cool in here. We've got a lot of shades. Alex Sexton writes, "Agreed, Paul. I'm committed to the fight to restore our great state. I'm considering throwing my hat in to unseat Sarita Austin." Hey, do it. Do it. Don't be afraid. Jerry Zeller writes, "First time hearing you, and I do like your ideals, so hopefully your campaign will relay that message. Good luck, and we need many like you to help get Vermont back on track." So with that, Joe, is there anything else you want to add before we close this out?
The old softball at the end. Thanks, Paul.
Absolutely.
One of the things looking at this campaign, affordability matters. And, as we saw in Montpelier on Monday, the supermajority doesn't care about affordability and how that affects Vermonters across the board. Doesn't matter, which end of the economic spectrum you're on. It's hurting everybody. It's just a question of, are we taking away the person's livelihood altogether through this affordability where they're choosing between heat and food, or is it, a severe inconvenience? And we've got solutions here, but we need your vote.
Yeah.
So I just look forward to your vote on November 5th. And Paul, it's been a real pleasure. It's been a great conversation. I really had a good time here.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that a lot. So I'm just going to close this out, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. Alan Sexton writes, good luck, Joe, on your way out. And you can't keep raising wages to support a state. That's Jerry. You're absolutely correct about that, Jerry. Everybody tuned in and commented. I just want to thank you very much. If you're viewing on Twitter, hit the follow button. On Instagram, hit the follow button. Follow us on Facebook. Like this video. Share this video. Subscribe to our YouTube. Any way that you can help support us. Those are some of the easiest ways that you can do that. And we greatly appreciate that support because we are growing at the Vermont Daily Chronicle and Creemee Cast, and we want to see this continue to keep going. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, don't be afraid to write in or email me or write us at Vermont Daily Chronicle. I'm signing out from Bean Studios in Northfield, Vermont, and